So hello and welcome back everyone. So today's video is going to be for the next chapter, chapter 3 on ethics and the environment. As you can see, I am streaming from my home office today. Hopefully the signal is good and we're able to stream the video. We'll find out by the end. So what I want to do is, just like last time, do a screen share of my slides. And walk you through the slides as I talk about the main points for the chapter. What I really want to focus on rather than go over each and every concept, because the book does a very good job of going over the concepts with you. What I want to really talk about are the highlights from the chapter that I really want you all to focus on. Some things I will explain in more detail, and some things I might ask you to focus on from the book. So this chapter is all about changing work environment, the environment of a manager, especially legal and the ethical environment. Over the last few years, business schools have become very cognizant of the fact that ethical education should be an important part of a business school's education, because our graduates are going out there dealing with money, dealing with ethical decisions, sometimes on a day-to-day basis, depending on which industry they're in. And a lot of our graduates sometimes are not prepared to face those decisions. And so this chapter is really important to help our graduates get a little preview or an understanding of why ethics are important in business decision making, and where all does it factor in, and why should we really care about ethics. So one of the biggest reasons why we should really care about ethics is to first understand who all is the company, or should a company be responsible to. A lot of times people say, employees, shareholders, those are the only people. Customers and shareholders is the answer that I most often get. But that's not really true. A company is responsible to its stakeholders. And now I want to make sure everyone understands the difference between stakeholders and shareholders. Stakeholders is a bigger group. It's a group of people whose interests are affected by the organization's activities. They could be members of the organization or not. As long as they are affected by the organization, they're stakeholders. Shareholders are people who actually own a share of the company. So shareholders are a kind of stakeholder, but stakeholder is a much bigger group of people. So if you look right here in the next slide, it shows you the different stakeholders an organization has. Most of the time people focus on the internal stakeholders because those are the easiest to think about and figure out. Well, yeah, internal stakeholders are important. They're just as important as external stakeholders are. If you look carefully, employees, owners, and the board of directors are the people who are making the organization work at a much more upper superficial level. We can tell, it's obvious to us. But if you look now at the next group of people, the external stakeholders, these are the people, the customers. Without customers, the company doesn't really exist. Without suppliers and distributors, the company would shut down, perhaps. These are much easier to understand stakeholders. What about competitors? Why are competitors stakeholders? Well, competitors can be stakeholders when, if you as an organization are doing something that's affecting the industry as a whole, competitors are affected by it too. So a small example I want to give is a few years ago, when that flight vanished above somewhere in the Indian Ocean near Malaysia. That did not just affect that particular airline whose flight or plane went down. It affected airline industry as a whole. Whenever a big accident, a plane crash like that happens, or a plane vanishes, it affects tourism, it affects hundreds of people who may or may not want, who may have been considering flying, and they get scared a little bit. So when tourism is affected, other competitors of that airline are also affected. So competitors are stakeholders as well. Lenders are stakeholders. That's easy to understand. If a company has taken a loan from a bank and they go under, that loan will never be repaid to the bank. So banks do care whether a company survives or not. And banks are affected by the company. How are political legal forces stakeholders in an organization? That's a little harder to understand, and that's the stuff that helps us understand why ethics are important even at a national level, not just at a community level. Customers are important, yes. Unions, lenders, distributors, they're all important. But an organization doesn't just exist for them. An organization, a company, exists in the community that it is based in. So if this organization is polluting, it's affecting that community that's living there. If this organization, so take Enron's example, when Enron did all those unethical things, it necessitated the politics and the legal system of the United States to look back and pass the Sarbanes-Oxley bill. And so in a way, the company Enron affected the political legal forces of the country at that time. So everything in the environment, whether it's the immediate environment or the environment that's a little bit more distal, is affected by the organization. So an organization really needs to think, who am I responsible to? Is it just my employees? Is it just my board of directors? Or is it just my bank? Not really. An organization is responsible to all these forces around the environment, the community, the people that sustain it, the planet that sustains it, the country that sustains it, the legal system that is taking care of it. So company is responsible to a lot more people than just shareholders. So that's an important distinction to understand. Once we understand that, ethics vis-a-vis business becomes slightly easier to understand as well. One of the things that I really stress for my students to understand is that for the modern manager, it's really important to understand that it's not enough for you to be ethical. You need to understand ethics, and you need to make sure your employees are ethical as well. So let's first talk about the first portion, which is you as a manager understanding what ethics are. What are ethics and values? I don't want students to confuse ethics and values. Ethics are the systems or standards of right or wrong. Values are inherent beliefs. There is a cyclical relationship between ethics and values. Values of a culture or values of an organization will determine ethics or ethical standards. Ethics is nothing more than morality or moral standards. So values will inform moral standards, and moral standards will inform and affect values that are held by people. One of the biggest questions that students struggle with in the classes is are ethics something that you learn, or is it something, or is morality something that you're just born with, or is morality something that you learn as you grow up? The simple answer is you learn. Ethics are learned. You're not born with the standard of good or bad. You're not born to know you should share. Your parents help you understand you need to share that packet of candy, or you need to be nice to your brother or sister. These are values, and ethics are inherently learned. You're not born with them, which is why you can increase your ethical compass. You can become better at making ethical decisions, especially when you're faced with ethical dilemmas. What is an ethical dilemma? Well, the book says an ethical dilemma is a situation in which you have to decide whether to pursue a course of action. Now, pay attention, please, to this portion. Pursue a course of action that may benefit you or your organization, but that is unethical or even illegal. Right? So should you, years ago, the question was, should you outsource? If you outsource, it's going to benefit your company. You're going to save the money. But it may be unethical because remember, one of the stakeholders for your organization is the local community that you are situated in. And if you outsource, you are effectively making all those people in your local community jobless and unemployed. You are affecting the economy of that local community. So it is unethical, but it is going to help your organization, right? So that's an ethical dilemma when you have to choose to do something, choose between doing something that may be good for you and at the same time maybe illegal or unethical. But is that a complete definition? Do you really agree that ethical dilemmas are when you have to choose between doing something legal or illegal when it's going to probably be good for you personally? Not really. That's just one half of the definition, so to speak. Ethical dilemmas are also when you have to choose between pursuing two courses of action, both of which may benefit your organization, or both of which may be the right thing to do. Or when you have to choose between two decisions, both of which may be the wrong thing to do. A CEO whose company is, let's say, situated in another country, has to decide between paying a ransom for the employees who were kidnapped or following the law, the American law, which says, kidnappers are treated as terrorists and we don't negotiate with terrorists. And so if the company pays these kidnappers, the company is breaking US law, federal law. But if the company does not pay the ransom to extricate these employees, they might effectively lose the lives of these employees. Those are two right decisions. Two decisions, and you can only take one. That's an ethical dilemma as well. For most of you, thankfully, you will not be faced with those kinds of life-altering ethical dilemmas. You probably will be faced with whether I should do this action that might personally benefit me, but it might be unethical. And how do you respond to that ethical dilemma is what would truly make you stand apart as a good leader and as a good manager. So there are different approaches. Now, how do you solve this ethical dilemma? There are different ways to do this. There are different approaches that people can take. And these approaches are what are called our ethical paradigms or ethical frameworks. So the first approach is the utilitarian approach. The utilitarian approach, in simpler terms, is greatest good for the greatest number of people. Usually when you're using this approach, you're looking at, is it okay for me to sacrifice these 5 people so that I can save 500 other people? So an example I would give you would be an organization that is going through tough financial times, and the decision they have to take right now is, do we fire 10% of the people so that the company can get back on its feet and retain the other 500 people who are still working, or 5,000 people who are still working? Or do we keep doing what we're doing in the hopes that we might be able to make it back? So utilitarian approach. Remember now, each of these approaches that I will talk about are just different ways of solving your ethical dilemma. No one approach is necessarily right or wrong. They're just different ways of approaching a problem and solving it.